The glass facade of the Sinclair Tower reflects nothing but my own desperate face back at me, a ghost against polished luxury I will never afford. Midnight has come and gone. I have been sitting in my 2004 Honda Civic for 40 minutes now, the car that has been my bedroom for the past 3 nights since the eviction notice became reality. The crumpled flyer sits on my dashboard, smooth white paper that feels obscene against the coffee stains and fast food wrappers that comprise my current life. Live in nanny position. Emergency start. No experience required. Compensation $5,000 per week. The address printed at the bottom matches the building looming before me, all steel and glass and money. $5,000 per week. I turn that number over in my mind like a prayer or a curse. My last paycheck from the diner was $340. I have $47 in my wallet right now, $12 in my checking account, and a maxed credit card I cannot look at without my chest tightening. My ex-husband made sure of that before he disappeared, leaving me with his gambling debts and a divorce lawyer I also could not afford. No experience required. That phrase should comfort me, but instead it feels like a trap, like bait left out for something hungry and desperate. I am both of those things. The flyer had been stapled to a bulletin board at the 24-hour laundromat where I washed my clothes this afternoon. My last clean shirt now tucked into my duffel bag along with everything else I own. Someone had written the address in pen at the bottom, the ink slightly smeared. I should not trust this. Every instinct I have left says walk away. But my phone battery is at 4% and I have no charger because I pawned my laptop and the charger went with it. I have nowhere to go when the sun comes up, except maybe back to the parking lot behind the grocery store where I slept last night until security knocked on my window at 2 a.m. I spent 6 years working as a line cook before I met David, before I believed in stability and normal jobs and futures that did not involve sleeping in cars. I gave that up for safety, for promises. The irony tastes like copper in my mouth. I grab my duffel bag. The zipper is broken on one side. I push open the car door and the November cold hits me immediately, cutting through my jacket that is too thin for this. The Sinclair Tower lobby glows warm and golden. I can see the security desk through the glass, a man in a dark suit standing behind it, his posture military straight. I cross the empty street. My breath clouds in the air. The revolving door is so smooth it barely makes a sound. Inside, the temperature shifts from biting to comfortable so quickly, it feels like stepping into another world. The marble floors gleam. Everything smells like expensive cleaning products and leather. The security guard watches me approach, his face carved from stone. I wonder what I look like to him. Desperate, probably. Poor, certainly. I open my mouth to explain, but he speaks first, his voice flat. You are here about the nanny position. It is not a question. He picks up a phone, presses a button, waits. She is here, he says to whoever answers. Then he hangs up and gestures toward the elevator bank. 40th floor. Mr. Sinclair is expecting you. My stomach drops. I did not call ahead. I did not make an appointment. How does anyone know I am here? The guard is already turning away, dismissing me. I force my legs to move toward the elevators. The doors open immediately, gold-edged and mirror-lined inside. I step in. Press 40. The doors close on my reflection, a 28-year-old woman with dark circles under her eyes and hope she cannot afford to feel. The elevator rises and I rise with it, toward something I do not understand, toward a decision I have already made because there are no other options left. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The elevator opens directly into the penthouse, and I step into darkness cut only by the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space is massive, all clean lines and expensive furniture arranged with precision, but it feels cold, untouched, like a showroom rather than a home. A figure detaches from the shadows near the windows, and my breath catches because Alexander Sinclair is the most beautiful, dangerous thing I have ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, dark hair slightly disheveled, like he has been running his hands through it. His face is all sharp angles and controlled power, jaw tight, eyes so dark they look black in this light. Those eyes fix on me with an intensity that makes me want to step back into the elevator. He radiates danger the way other men radiate cologne, an invisible force that says predator, says threat, says run. My body knows what my desperation will not let me acknowledge. He does not smile, does not offer his hand, just looks at me like he is assessing merchandise. "You are Emma Thornhill," he says, and his voice is deep, rough-edged, certain. I nod, because my throat has closed. 12. Nannies have quit in 6 months. His jaw works like the words cost him something. My son is 7 years old, autistic, nonverbal, particular about routines and sensory input. No one can handle him. Then from somewhere deeper in the penthouse comes a sound that raises every hair on my body, a high-pitched scream of pure distress, wordless and endless. Alexander's whole body goes rigid. A muscle jumps in his jaw, but he does not move toward the sound, does not even look in that direction. "That is Thomas," he says, his voice now completely flat. "That is what you would be managing." The scream continues, rising and falling. I hear desperation underneath Alexander's clinical presentation. Buried so deep, maybe he does not recognize it himself. But I spent years reading customers across a kitchen pass, learning to see what people will not say. This man is drowning. His son is drowning. He is offering me $5,000 per week because he has run out of options. The screaming gets louder. "You have references," he asks, but it is not really a question. He does not actually care. I could tell him anything right now, and he would believe it because he needs to believe it. "No," I admit. "I have been out of childcare work for years. I do not mention I was never in childcare work at all." His eyes narrow slightly, but then Thomas screams again, and Alexander's control fractures just enough for me to see the rawness underneath. "When can you start?" he asks. The question catches me off guard. You have not asked me anything. My work history, my background, why I am here at midnight. He looks at me fully then, and I feel the weight of that gaze everywhere, assessing and intense. "You are here because you are desperate. So am I. Everything else is irrelevant. Can you start now?" I should run. Every survival instinct I have says this is wrong. Too much money, too little scrutiny, a man who looks like he kills people for a living and probably does. But Thomas is still screaming, and I have $47 and nowhere to sleep tomorrow. "Yes," I hear myself say. "I want to meet him first. Meet Thomas." Alexander goes very still. Then something shifts in his expression, something almost like respect. He nods once. "Follow me." Alexander moves through the penthouse with silent purpose, and I follow, my duffel bag still clutched in one hand like a talisman against whatever I am about to face. The screaming grows louder as we navigate a hallway lined with abstract art that probably costs more than I made in a year. He stops at a door covered in various locks, all currently open, and pushes it inward. The room beyond is large and overwhelming, painted a bright yellow that assaults my eyes even in the dim light. Thomas sits in the corner farthest from the door, small for 7 years old, dark hair like his father, rocking back and forth with his hands pressed hard over his ears. Scattered around him is food, bread torn to pieces, what looks like chicken nuggets thrown against the wall, a bowl overturned with its contents pooling on the expensive rug. Overhead fluorescent lights buzz with that particular frequency that makes my own teeth ache. Alexander steps into the room and his entire demeanor shifts, the predator receding to reveal something raw underneath. "Thomas," he says, his voice soft in a way I would not have believed possible minutes ago. "Thomas, someone is here to meet you." The boy does not look up, does not acknowledge his father in any way, just continues rocking with mechanical precision. Alexander's jaw tightens, and I see the helplessness radiate from him, this powerful man rendered powerless by his son's unreachable world. I move past Alexander slowly, telegraphing my presence. "The lights," I say. "Can you dim them or turn them off?" Alexander looks at me for a long moment, then moves to a panel by the door. The overhead lights cut out, and the room falls into gentler illumination from a small lamp on the dresser. The change is immediate. Thomas's rocking slows fractionally. I lower myself to the floor about 6 feet from where he sits, careful to stay at his eye level rather than looming above. I do not reach for him. Do not speak to him directly. Instead, I begin describing what I see in a calm, even voice, the kind of narration I used to use in busy kitchens to keep myself centered. There is a blue truck by the closet. The carpet is soft. The window shows city lights. Thomas's rocking continues, but his hands lower slightly from his ears. I see scattered food, bread pieces. The bread is white, soft texture, torn into small bits. Something shifts in Thomas's stillness. His rocking slows more. Alexander has gone completely motionless behind me, barely breathing, and I feel the weight of his attention like heat against my back. I continue speaking, describing colors and shapes, keeping my tone rhythmic and predictable. Thomas's hands drop to his lap. He does not look at me, but his head tilts slightly, listening perhaps, or simply tolerating my presence in a way he could not tolerate whatever came before. On the dresser sit framed photographs, a family of 3, Alexander younger and less carved from stone, a beautiful woman with dark hair and warm eyes, Thomas as a toddler between them. The woman appears in multiple photos throughout the room, present in images, absent in reality. I understand more than Alexander has told me. After several minutes, I stop talking and simply sit, matching my breathing to the rhythm Thomas has established with his movement. The silence stretches. Then Thomas picks up one of the torn bread pieces and puts it in his mouth, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on the wall. It is such a small thing, but Alexander's sharp inhale behind me suggests it is monumental. I look back at him, and our eyes meet. His face is unreadable, but something passes between us, an understanding, a desperate, fragile hope. I turn back to Thomas and make my decision, the one I made the moment I walked into this penthouse, the moment I saw that flyer, perhaps even earlier when I ran out of choices and discovered what remains when everything else is stripped away. "I will take the position," I tell Alexander without looking at him again. "I will stay." Morning light cuts through the floor-to-ceiling windows like an accusation, and I wake disoriented in a bedroom larger than my former apartment. Sheets with a thread count I cannot begin to guess tangled around my legs. For 3 seconds I forget where I am, and then it crashes back. The penthouse, Alexander Sinclair, Thomas, the choice I made in desperation and exhaustion. I find my way to Thomas's room where he sits on his bed staring at the wall. Already dressed in clothes I assume Alexander managed before leaving, because I hear the shower running, in what must be the master suite. The previous nanny left notes in a binder, detailed schedules and behavioral protocols that read like a military operation. I follow them precisely for breakfast, presenting Thomas with his meal at the exact time specified, using the divided plate described, offering the approved foods in the approved arrangement. Thomas looks at the plate for exactly 4 seconds before sweeping it onto the floor with one violent motion. The crash makes me flinch. Scrambled eggs slide down the cabinet. Toast lands butter side down on the pristine tile. Thomas begins hitting his head with his fists, rhythmic and terrible, and I move toward him instinctively, but he screams and the sound drills into my skull. I grab his wrists as gently as I can to stop the hitting, and he thrashes, surprisingly strong, and I am failing, completely and utterly failing. Then Alexander is there, materializing in the kitchen doorway like a beautiful threat, wearing a black suit that probably costs more than my car did, his hair still damp, his eyes taking in the scene with cold assessment. I release Thomas immediately and step back. Alexander's jaw works, but his voice stays controlled when he speaks. George Hastings is downstairs. Head of security. Call if you need anything. His tone suggests that needing anything would constitute failure, that I have one job and Thomas's distress is evidence I cannot do it. He looks at his son with something raw crossing his face before the mask slams back. Then he turns and walks out, and I hear the elevator doors close, and I am alone, 40 floors above the city, with a child I do not understand and no idea what I am doing. Thomas has stopped screaming, but sits rocking now, that same mechanical motion from last night, and I feel panic rising like floodwater. Every instinct says I should leave, should call that elevator back, should run before I cause more damage, but I have nowhere to run to, no money for anywhere better. This penthouse is a cage, but it is the only cage available. I start cleaning up the breakfast disaster, moving slowly, narrating my actions in that same calm voice I used before. I am picking up the plate. I am wiping the eggs from the cabinet. Thomas rocks and rocks. Then, without warning, he bolts from his chair and runs, not toward his room but deeper into the penthouse, toward the massive kitchen I glimpsed last night. I follow and find him stopped in front of the professional-grade stove, 6 burners, stainless steel, the kind I used to dream about owning. Thomas stands motionless, staring at it, and his stimming has changed, his hands flapping at his sides, but the distress absent from the motion. He looks almost peaceful. An idea forms, desperate and half-formed. I move beside him carefully and ask, "Do you want to cook?" And even as the words leave my mouth, I realize this might be the answer I have been searching for. Thomas does not answer with words, but his hands stop their distressed flapping and instead begin moving in smaller circles at his sides, a shift so subtle I might have missed it if I were not watching him with desperate attention. I move to the refrigerator and find ingredients, basic staples that someone keeps stocked, and I pull out butter and pasta and garlic because these are simple things, foundational things, the kind of meal I could make in my sleep during my line cook days. I begin narrating as I work, my voice falling into that same rhythmic cadence from last night. I am filling a pot with water. The pot is large and silver. I am placing it on the front burner. Thomas shifts closer by increments, drawn by something in the process, or the narration, or perhaps simply the absence of demands being made of him. I turn the burner to high, and the blue flame springs to life with a soft whoosh, and Thomas goes very still, watching the fire with complete focus. I am adding salt to the water, I continue. The salt is white crystals. They dissolve into the water. I open the pasta box and the sound makes Thomas flinch, but he does not retreat. I show him the dry pasta, long thin strands, and then I find a wooden spoon in a drawer and hold it out to him without expectation. For 10 seconds he does not move, and I prepare to set it down and continue alone. But then his hand extends, and his fingers close around the handle, and he takes it from me. The weight of this small victory nearly buckles my knees. I return to the stove and add the pasta to the now boiling water and stir, and Thomas stands beside me holding his wooden spoon like a talisman, not participating, but present, calm, engaged in a way I have not yet seen. I mince garlic and the smell fills the kitchen, sharp and alive. I melt butter in a pan and add the garlic, and the sizzle is music, familiar and soothing. Thomas watches everything with absolute attention, and the 20 minutes it takes to cook this simple meal stretch into something sacred, a space where the chaos recedes and structure emerges. When the pasta is finished, I drain it and toss it with the garlic butter and plate it carefully, a small portion on one of Thomas's divided plates. I set it on the kitchen island and step back, giving him space and choice. He looks at the plate for a long moment, and then climbs onto a stool and picks up a fork and takes a bite. Then another, then 2 more. 4 bites total before he stops and slides off the stool, and walks away still holding the wooden spoon, but I am shaking with relief because the nanny note said he has barely eaten anything in days, and 4 bites is a feast by comparison. I clean the kitchen in a daze of cautious hope, and the day passes in fragile peace. And when evening comes, I hear the elevator, and then Alexander appears in the hallway, and I see it immediately. The blood on his right cuff that he has tried to hide by adjusting his sleeve, the tension in his shoulders that speaks of violence recently committed, the coldness in his eyes that thaws only slightly when he looks past me into the living room where Thomas sits on the floor arranging blocks in careful lines. Alexander's gaze shifts to me, and I watch something move through his expression. Surprise, certainly when I tell him Thomas ate. But underneath that, something darker and more dangerous. A hunger that has nothing to do with food and everything to do with the way his eyes trace my face, like he is memorizing terrain before a battle. The next 3 days unfold in a rhythm I create through sheer desperation and instinct, building each hour around the kitchen and the strange peace Thomas finds there. Morning becomes eggs whisked in a steel bowl, the sound regular and soothing, Thomas standing beside me holding a silicone spatula while I narrate every motion. Afternoon is chopping vegetables, the thunk of the knife against cutting board marking time like a metronome, Thomas arranging the cut pieces by color on a plate with focused intensity. Evening is the main event, more complex dishes that require multiple steps, and I watch Thomas begin to anticipate what comes next, his body positioning itself by the stove before I even reach for a pan. His meltdowns decrease from 4 or 5 a day to maybe 1, and that single episode is shorter, less violent, easier to redirect toward the kitchen, where his hands can find purpose in wooden spoons and measuring cups. I learn his sensory world through trial and error that feels like diffusing bombs. He cannot tolerate the sound of the food processor, but loves the manual grinder. Smooth textures repel him, but he will eat anything with visible texture, seeds and grains, and rough edges. He needs warning before transitions, a 2-minute countdown I deliver in that same calm narration. And he needs space when overwhelmed, a corner of the kitchen I leave empty for his retreat. Alexander becomes a shadow that appears later each night. 8 p.m., then 9, then 10, his suit's progressively more rumpled, his jaw tight with a tension that radiates from him like heat from pavement. He asks about Thomas, receives my reports with nods that might be approval, and disappears into his study, where I hear his voice through the door speaking in Italian and English about things I do not want to understand. On the third night, I pass his study at midnight on my way to get water, and the door is cracked, and I hear him say, "The North shipment is compromised. 2 of our men are missing, and the Calabrese family is moving on our territory." I stand frozen in the hallway, and the words confirm what I already know, that I am living in the home of a criminal, that the money paying for my room and safety comes from sources I cannot examine too closely, that danger surrounds this place like a moat. I should care more than I do, but Thomas needs me, and that need has become the only thing that matters. On the 4th day, Alexander comes home at 6 p.m., startlingly early, and follows the sound of our voices to the kitchen where Thomas and I are making bread, proper bread that requires kneading, and flour covers every surface including both of us. Thomas has his small hands buried in dough, pressing and folding with total absorption, and I guide his movements with words while my own hands work beside his. Alexander appears in the doorway and stops completely, his entire body going still in a way that makes my skin prickle with awareness. I feel his gaze like a physical weight, not on Thomas, but on me, on my flour-dusted arms, and the loose hair escaping my braid, and the smile I wear while watching Thomas work. The air thickens. Thomas continues kneading, oblivious, but I cannot move, cannot breathe, pinned by the intensity of Alexander's attention and the hunger I see written plainly in his dark eyes before he turns and walks away without saying a single word. Alexander finds me in the kitchen after Thomas finally settles into sleep at 9 p.m. The boy exhausted from an afternoon of making elaborate vegetable stock that required chopping and stirring and careful attention. Alexander has showered and changed from his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that makes him look younger and somehow more dangerous, less the polished businessman, and more the predator I know he truly is. He asks if I will have dinner with him, his voice carefully neutral, and my heart kicks against my ribs hard enough to bruise. But I agree, because refusing feels impossible when he looks at me like I am something precious and bewildering. We sit at the dining table that has remained unused since my arrival, all our meals taken in the kitchen with Thomas. And the formality feels strange until Alexander pours wine into crystal glasses and serves the pasta I made earlier, the one Thomas helped measure ingredients for, and something about him performing these small domestic tasks makes my throat tight. He asks about my life before this, and I find myself talking, the words spilling out about my ex-husband Marcus and his gambling that swallowed our savings and left me with debts that had my name attached, about the eviction notice and the desperate weeks of choosing between my phone bill and food, about my years as a line cook in a downtown restaurant before I gave it up for an office job that promised stability, but delivered only soul-crushing boredom before the layoffs came. Alexander listens with an intensity that makes me feel like he is cataloging every word, his dark eyes never leaving my face. And when I finally stop talking, he is quiet for a long moment before he speaks. He tells me about Thomas's mother, about Sophia, who was beautiful and kind and entirely innocent of the world Alexander inhabited, about the car accident 2 years ago that took her life when the brakes were cut by the Moretti family as a warning to Alexander over a territorial dispute. His voice goes flat with a grief so enormous it has calcified into something hard and permanent, and he says it clearly, that the attack was meant for him, that Sophia died because she loved him, that Thomas lost his mother because of Alexander's choices. I see it then, the guilt that lives in him like a second skeleton, the way he holds himself apart from his own son, because he believes he destroys everything he touches. I recognize that we are both drowning, him in culpability, and me in consequences of someone else's choices, both of us trying to save a child while barely keeping our own heads above water. Alexander reaches for the breadbasket at the same moment I do, and our hands collide, his fingers brushing across my knuckles, and the contact sends electricity straight up my arm and into my chest, where it detonates like something incendiary. He jerks his hand back as though burned, but his eyes have gone almost black, pupils blown wide, and the air between us thickens into something I can barely breathe through. The temperature shifts. Everything shifts. He stands abruptly and thanks me for dinner in a voice gone rough and walks away, leaving me alone with my racing pulse and the terrible certainty that I am in danger of an entirely different kind than I had anticipated. The sound that wakes me at 2 a.m. is not Thomas, but heavy footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets moving with purpose, and my body floods with adrenaline before my mind fully surfaces from sleep. I grab my phone and stumble to my bedroom door, opening it to find the living room flooded with light and filled with men, 6 of them in dark suits with weapons visible in shoulder holsters. And my heart stops completely until I see George Hastings speaking in low, urgent tones to Alexander, who stands in pajama pants and nothing else, his hair disheveled and his face carved from stone. George sees me first, and his expression tightens, and Alexander turns, and something in his eyes makes my blood run cold, because I see fear there, real fear, and I have never seen him afraid of anything. Alexander crosses to me in 3 strides, and his hands close on my shoulders, not rough but firm, grounding, and he tells me in a voice gone flat and controlled that we are leaving now. That I need to pack a bag for Thomas with his sensory items and comfort objects, that we have 10 minutes before the cars arrive. I ask what is happening, and he says the Calabrese family has made a move, that his South warehouse was hit 2 hours ago and 4 of his men are dead. That intelligence suggests they know about this location and are moving on it now. Terror turns my legs liquid, but Alexander's hands tighten, and he says my name firmly, Emma. And the sound cuts through the panic, and he tells me he will not let anything happen to me or Thomas, that I need to trust him and move quickly. I run to Thomas's room where the boy sleeps curled under his weighted blanket, and I pull his go bag from the closet, the one I packed last week after overhearing too many tense phone calls. Filled with his favorite wooden spoon and his noise-canceling headphones and the soft flannel shirt he strokes when overwhelmed. I wake Thomas as gently as possible, but gentle does not matter because the wrongness of the situation hits him immediately. Strange men in the house and his father's fear like smoke in the air. And Thomas starts keening, that high distressed sound that signals a complete meltdown approaching. Alexander appears in the doorway, and I see him flinch at his son's distress, helpless in the face of it, and I move on pure instinct, sitting on the floor at Thomas's level and beginning the narration, telling him we are going on a night adventure to a house with a kitchen, a new kitchen where we will make pancakes in the morning, describing the pancakes in detail, the butter melting and the syrup pooling golden. Thomas's keening lowers in pitch, and I keep talking, pulling his headphones onto his ears and his comfort shirt into his hands, and slowly he allows me to guide him upright and toward the door. Alexander watches me with something like awe breaking through his fear, and George calls that the cars are here, and we move as a unit through the penthouse and into the private elevator. The armored SUV idles in the underground garage, dark and sleek and full of threat, and Thomas balks at the door until I climb in first and position myself in the back seat. And then he follows, pressing against my side, and Alexander slides in after us, and the door closes with a heavy thunk that sounds like a cell locking. The car moves, and Thomas trembles against me, and I feel Alexander's arm come around both of us. His hand on my shoulder and his body curved protectively around us both, and for just a moment, I let myself lean into his strength, into the solid reality of him, while the city blurs past the tinted windows and danger chases us into the night. The safe house reveals itself in dawn light as we wind up a gravel drive through towering pines, a sprawling estate of glass and cedar perched on the edge of a slate-gray lake that stretches toward mountains I cannot name. Thomas has finally fallen into exhausted sleep against my shoulder, his fingers still clutching the flannel shirt, and Alexander has not moved his arm from around us for the entire 90-minute drive, his body a wall between us and the windows, between us and whatever hunts him in the darkness. George exits the lead vehicle first, scanning the property with professional efficiency before signaling the all clear, and only then does Alexander allow our driver to open the door, and even then he exits first, positioning himself as a shield while I guide Thomas's sleep-heavy weight out into air that smells of pine sap and cold water. The house is beautiful in a stark masculine way, all clean lines and exposed beams, and a kitchen that makes my breath catch because it is massive and full of light, windows overlooking the lake, and I think wildly that if we must hide, then at least Thomas will have this. Alexander speaks quietly with George and three other men whose names I do not catch, posting guards at the perimeter and checking security systems. And I carry Thomas to a bedroom and lay him on a bed with sheets that smell of lavender and watch his face relax into deeper sleep now that the motion has stopped. Alexander appears in the doorway, jacket discarded and holster visible under his arm, a reminder of what he is, and his eyes find mine with something raw and unguarded before his walls reconstruct themselves. He tells me we are safe here, that his men control the only access road, that the Calabrese family will be handled within 72 hours. And I hear the violence implicit in that word handled, but I only ask if he believes it, and he says yes. For 3 days, we exist in strange suspension, the world narrowed to this house, and the lake, and the rhythm I impose because Thomas needs structure the way he needs oxygen. I cook every meal in that light-filled kitchen, narrating for Thomas who adapts with surprising resilience, his meltdowns fewer than I anticipated, and I realize that for him, the location matters less than the routine, less than my presence, and the promise of the next meal we will make together. Alexander works from the study, his voice occasionally audible through the closed door, cold and commanding, discussing things I do not want to understand, but I insist he join us for meals, and I watch something extraordinary happen. He begins to follow my lead with Thomas, sitting at his son's level, waiting for the boy to initiate contact rather than forcing it, narrating his own actions the way I do. And Thomas responds, allowing his father closer than I have ever witnessed. On the third evening after Thomas finally sleeps, I cannot bear the walls any longer, and I walk down to the dock that extends into the dark water, wrapping my arms against the cold. And I do not hear Alexander approach, but suddenly he is there, sitting beside me on the weathered wood, close enough that I feel his warmth. We sit in silence for long minutes before he speaks, asking if I am frightened, and I answer honestly that I am terrified, but not of what he thinks, not of the Calabrese family or the violence that chases us, but of what happens after, of the impossibility of returning to my small life after living in his. He turns to look at me, and his face in the moonlight is stripped of defenses, and he tells me he does not know how to be what Thomas needs, that he has failed his son in every way that matters, that watching me reach the boy makes him realize how profoundly he has gotten it wrong. My hand moves of its own accord, covering his where it rests on his knee, and his entire body goes still, and he stares at our joined hands like I have offered him something holy, something he does not deserve but wants desperately enough to take anyway. The return to the penthouse happens on a gray morning when George delivers the news that the Calabrese situation has been resolved, and I do not ask what resolved means because the set of Alexander's jaw tells me everything I need to know about the cost. Thomas handles the transition better than I expect, his relief at returning to familiar spaces visible in the way his shoulders drop from their hunched tension, and within an hour he is in the kitchen opening cabinets and touching his wooden spoons like greeting old friends. Alexander disappears into his study for meetings that stretch through the afternoon, his voice audible through the heavy door, cold and absolute, the voice of a man who has just reminded his world why crossing him is fatal. But when he emerges for dinner that first night back, something fundamental has shifted in him. He comes home earlier now, by 6 instead of 9 or 10, shedding his jacket in the foyer, and coming directly to the kitchen where Thomas and I work, and he watches us with an expression I cannot name, something hungry and wondering, and almost desperate. Thomas begins attempting words in the second week after our return, just single syllables at first, butter and salt and hot, his voice rusty and uncertain but growing stronger each day, and when he says pasta clearly enough that both Alexander and I freeze in shock, Alexander's eyes find mine across the table with such raw gratitude that my chest tightens. He credits me entirely, telling me over Thomas's head that I have given him his son back. But I see the truth, which is that Alexander has learned to meet Thomas where he lives, has learned patience and observation and the art of waiting for invitation rather than demanding compliance. The tension between us becomes unbearable, a living thing that charges every accidental brush of hands and every moment our eyes meet, and I lie awake at night in my room knowing he is 2 doors away and remembering the weight of his arm around me in the car, the way he looked at our joined hands on the dock like I was offering salvation. I am falling for him, have already fallen, and it is the most foolish thing I have ever done because he is dangerous and damaged and his world eats people like me. But inevitability does not care about wisdom. On a Thursday evening while I am cooking risotto, explaining to Thomas how the rice absorbs the stock slowly, Alexander enters the kitchen, and instead of taking his usual position across the island, he comes to stand behind me, close enough that I feel the heat of him, and his voice over my shoulder asks about the technique, something about stirring. But I cannot focus on his words because his breath ghosts across my neck, and every nerve ending in my body lights up like flame. My hands tremble and the spoon clatters against the pan, and I feel rather than see him notice, and for a moment he stays there, his chest nearly brushing my back, near enough that if I leaned back even slightly, I would be pressed against him, and I want that with an intensity that frightens me. Then he steps back abruptly, and turns and leaves the kitchen without another word, and I stand there gripping the counter while my heart attempts to hammer through my ribs, and Thomas looks at me curiously and says my name, Emma, like a question I cannot answer. The man arrives on a Tuesday afternoon while Thomas and I are making chocolate chip cookies, his appearance announced by George's terse phone call to Alexander that sends a visible tension through the penthouse walls, even before I understand why. Alexander emerges from his study with a face gone cold and dangerous, telling me to take Thomas to his room and stay there, and the command in his voice makes me want to argue, but the look in his eyes stops me, because I have never seen him afraid before, and I am seeing it now, buried deep but present. Thomas resists leaving the kitchen with cookies still unbaked, but I promise we will finish them later and guide him away. Hearing voices in the foyer. A man's voice I do not recognize saying he knew Cassandra, Alexander's dead wife, saying he has information Alexander needs to hear. For the next 3 days, Alexander is gone more than he is present, chasing whatever thread this man has pulled. And when he is home, he radiates a tension that fills every room like smoke, and Thomas feels it the way he feels everything, becoming clingy and distressed, his words disappearing back into humming and hand flapping. I try to maintain our routine, but it fractures under the weight of Alexander's absence and his haunted eyes when he returns in the early morning hours, smelling of night air and something darker. On the 4th day, I find a man in a dark suit standing outside the penthouse door, and George explains that Alexander has assigned personal security to me, that I am not to leave the building without escort, and rage blooms hot and sudden in my chest because I am not his to command, not his possession to guard like the art on his walls. When Alexander comes home that evening, I am waiting, having left Thomas with George, and I confront him in his study, demanding to know what gives him the right to assign guards to me like I am property he owns. His jaw tightens and he tells me his world has rules I do not understand, that people close to him become targets, that he will not risk me. And I ask him what I am to him exactly, what gives him the right to make decisions about my safety, my freedom. He stands from behind his desk, and the air between us ignites because we have been circling this for weeks. The wanting and the fear and the impossibility. And his voice drops low and rough when he says he cannot bear the thought of me in danger, cannot survive losing another person who matters. And I step closer and ask why I matter, ask him to say it, and his control shatters like glass. He crosses the space between us in 2 strides, and his hands come up to frame my face, and he kisses me with a desperation that steals my breath. His mouth hungry and demanding, and I respond with equal ferocity, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss is everything. Heat and need, and all the tension that has been building since that first night when his arm came around me in the car. We break apart, both breathing hard, and his forehead drops to mine, and he says this cannot happen, that he is poison, that everyone he loves dies, and I say I know, I agree, but neither of us moves away, and his thumb traces my lower lip, and I see the war in his eyes between what he wants and what he believes will keep me safe. We maintain painful distance for 5 days that feel like years, circling each other in the penthouse like magnets forced into reverse polarity. And every time our eyes meet, the air crackles with everything we said and did in his study, and everything we are trying not to repeat. Alexander leaves earlier and returns later, throwing himself into whatever dangerous business consumes his days. And when he is home, he avoids the kitchen, avoids me, speaking only about Thomas's needs in clipped professional tones that feel like knives. I focus entirely on Thomas, pouring all my confused feelings into cooking lessons and gentle routine. But Thomas is not fooled because he sees everything even when he cannot name it. And his distress manifests in returning hand flapping and refusal to use the words he has worked so hard to find. On the 6th day, Thomas will not get out of bed, lying curled on his side humming tunelessly, and when Alexander comes to check on him before leaving for a business dinner, his face goes tight with fear and guilt, and our eyes meet over Thomas's small form, and I see my own anguish reflected back at me. Alexander tells me quietly that the dinner is unavoidable, a meeting with the Genovese family that has been scheduled for weeks, but he will return as soon as possible, and I hear myself suggesting that Thomas and I will cook something special for his return, that maybe having a goal will help Thomas engage, and Alexander's expression splinters into something raw and grateful before he locks it down and nods once and leaves. I spend an hour sitting beside Thomas's bed, talking quietly about what we could make, running through his favorite dishes. And finally, he stirs when I mention the mushroom risotto Alexander once said reminded him of his childhood. And Thomas sits up and looks at me, and his mouth works silently for a moment before he says with painful clarity, the first full sentence I have ever heard from him, "Emma, stay." Just those two words, but they land like an earthquake. I freeze with tears instantly burning my eyes, and I ask him to repeat it, and he does. "Emma, stay." And I promise him, yes, I am staying. I am here. And he climbs out of bed and takes my hand and leads me to the kitchen. We work together for 2 hours, Thomas helping measure and stir with more focus than he has shown in days, and I let the familiar rhythm of cooking soothe us both while my mind spins around those two words and what they mean and what I want them to mean. When Alexander returns at 9, he finds us waiting at the dining table, the risotto staying warm on the stove, and Thomas looks up at his father's entrance and repeats with absolute certainty, "Emma, stay." And I watch Alexander freeze in the doorway, still wearing his suit jacket and the careful mask he wears to dangerous meetings. His eyes find mine across the room, and the weight of that gaze holds everything, all the fear and wanting and impossibility we have been drowning in, and his voice comes out rough when he asks if that is what I want, if staying here in his dangerous broken world, with all its threats and violence, is truly what I choose. I meet his eyes and say yes, despite the danger, despite knowing his enemies will see me as a target, despite the fact that he is a criminal and I am in love with him, and this will probably destroy me. Yes, I want to stay, and the word hangs in the air between us like a vow. It happens on a Thursday morning in the parking garage beneath the building, and I only survive because George has been shadowing me for 3 weeks now on Alexander's paranoid orders that suddenly seem less paranoid and more prophetic. I am walking to my car, the used sedan Alexander insisted on buying me after my old one finally died, carrying groceries for a lemon cake Thomas requested, when a black van pulls up too fast, and two men emerge, and George is shouting, and his gun is out, and I am grabbed from behind, a hand over my mouth, being dragged toward the open van door. Everything happens in seconds and forever simultaneously, the chemical smell of the hand covering my face, George's gunshot impossibly loud in the concrete space, the man holding me grunting and releasing me, my knees hitting the ground hard, more gunshots, tires squealing, and then George is lifting me up asking if I am hurt while speaking rapidly into his phone calling for Alexander. They take me back to the penthouse where Alexander arrives 10 minutes later, moving like violence contained in a suit, his face a mask of fury so cold it burns, and he grips my shoulders and searches my face and asks if they touched me, hurt me, and I shake my head unable to form words yet. His hands are trembling against my shoulders, and that terrifies me more than the attempted abduction because Alexander never trembles, never shows cracks, and when he pulls me against his chest, his heart is racing as fast as mine. He holds me for 30 seconds before his phone rings, and he releases me to answer it, his voice dropping into a tone I have never heard before, something lethal and absolute, giving orders that make my blood cold. When he ends the call, he tells me I have to leave, that I need to pack, and he will set me up anywhere in the country I want to go, that he will give me enough money to disappear and start over and be safe, and the words hit me like a physical blow. I ask if he is sending me away, and he says he is saving my life, that his enemies know now that I matter to him, and they will keep coming, that everyone close to him ends up dead, and he will not let that happen to me. I feel rage kindle hot beneath my fear, and I tell him no, I am not leaving. He does not get to make this choice for me, and he argues that I do not understand the danger, that these men will torture me to hurt him, use me as leverage, kill me as a message. I throw back that I understand perfectly and I am choosing to stay anyway, and our voices rise, both of us wielding cruelty like weapons, me accusing him of taking the easy way out by pushing me away instead of fighting for what we have, him telling me I am naive and foolish and he is trying to keep me alive. Thomas appears in the doorway of the living room, where we are destroying each other, and his hands go over his ears, and he starts humming that tuneless sound that means he is shutting down, and we both freeze. Alexander moves toward his son, but Thomas backs away and disappears down the hall, and the sound of his bedroom door slamming echoes like a gunshot. Alexander's face crumples for just a moment before he turns and walks out of the penthouse entirely, leaving me standing alone surrounded by the wreckage of words we cannot take back. Thomas does not emerge from his room for 2 days, and he will not eat, will not speak, will not even look at either of us when we try separately and together to reach him. And the silence in the penthouse becomes suffocating as Alexander and I move around each other like ghosts, haunted by our own cruelty. On the third morning, I wake to find Alexander sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his head in his hands. And when he looks up, his eyes are red-rimmed and defeated in a way that terrifies me more than his fury ever could. He tells me hoarsely that he has been awake all night trying to find a solution that keeps me safe and keeps Thomas stable, and there is none, that every path leads to loss. And I see him breaking under the weight of impossible choices. I sit beside him and take his hand and tell him there is another option, one that terrifies me but feels inevitable, and he looks at me with desperate hope and asks what. I say he could claim me publicly, make our relationship known to all the families, offer me his protection officially so that touching me becomes an act of war rather than a strategic move, and I watch his expression cycle through shock and refusal and terrible consideration. He argues it will paint a target on my back that never disappears, that I will be watched and judged and threatened for as long as I stay with him, that some will see it as weakness to parade and others as an insult to the memory of his wife. I meet his eyes and tell him I understand, and I choose it anyway. That hiding has not kept me safe, and at least this way I stand beside him instead of cowering behind him. Something breaks open in his face, and he pulls me against him and breathes into my hair that he loves me, he is terrified, and he loves me, and I say it back against his chest, feeling his heart hammer. We go to Thomas together and sit on the floor outside his closed door, and Alexander tells him through the wood that Emma is staying forever, that we are together now as a family, that nothing will separate us. And I add that I love them both, and I am not leaving no matter what. For long minutes there is only silence, and then the door opens slowly, and Thomas stands there looking between us, with those serious dark eyes. And Alexander holds out his hand, and after a moment, Thomas takes it and then reaches for mine. That afternoon, Alexander makes 6 phone calls to the heads of the other families operating in the city, his voice cold and formal as he informs them that Emma Thornhill is under his protection as his partner, that any threat to her is a threat to him directly, and I listen to him declare war for me with each careful word. Within 2 hours, Salvatore Costa, head of the family that ordered my abduction, calls requesting a sit-down to discuss Alexander's breach of protocol by publicly involving a civilian. Alexander starts to refuse, but I tell him I want to attend, that I need to look these men in the eyes and show them I am not a victim to be rescued or a pawn to be played. He argues it is too dangerous, but I stand firm, and finally he agrees on the condition that George and 3 other guards accompany us. The meeting is set for the following evening at a neutral restaurant, and as Alexander makes preparations, I feel fear and determination war inside me, knowing I am about to walk into a room full of criminals and claim my place among them not as prey, but as Alexander's equal choice. 3 months have passed since the sit-down, where I met the eyes of men who would have ordered my death without hesitation, and told them I understood exactly what I was choosing. And the autumn light through the penthouse windows has softened from the harsh brightness of summer into something golden and forgiving. I stand at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables for the chicken soup Thomas requested this morning, his vocabulary expanding daily in ways that make Alexander's eyes shine with grateful wonder. And I hear Thomas behind me carefully folding napkins the way I taught him, his movements precise and deliberate. Officially, I am employed as Thomas's specialized care provider, the paperwork filed through proper channels to satisfy the scrutiny of social services and Alexander's lawyers. But at night, I slip into Alexander's bed, where he reaches for me like I am oxygen and he has been drowning. The danger has not evaporated despite the uneasy peace brokered after that tense meeting. I still have George shadowing me on errands, and the security system is more sophisticated than some government buildings, and there are still nights when Alexander comes home with blood on his cuffs he thinks I do not notice. But we have learned to move through the threat together. The three of us a unit that bends but does not break. And Thomas's progress alone makes every moment of fear worthwhile. He speaks in simple sentences now, mostly about food and cooking, but increasingly branching into other observations. And yesterday he told me unprompted that he loves me. The words careful and deliberate and perfect. I hear the private elevator chime and my heart lifts the way it does every time Alexander comes home. That Pavlovian response I have stopped trying to suppress. And Thomas immediately abandons his napkin folding to run toward the entryway, calling out that we are making soup. Alexander appears in the kitchen doorway still wearing his suit jacket, his tie loosened, looking like he stepped from some dangerous fantasy, and his eyes find mine first, the way they always do now, that molten dark gaze that still makes my breath catch. He crosses to me in 3 strides and pulls me against him despite my protests about wet hands and vegetable scraps, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that tastes like possession and promise and coming home. Thomas makes a sound that might be laughter or approval and announces that dinner will be ready in 20 minutes with the seriousness of a head chef. And Alexander releases me only far enough to look down into my face while his thumb traces my cheekbone. He murmurs that he loves me, and I say it back, the words as necessary as breathing now, before he moves to Thomas and ruffles his hair gently in the specific way Thomas tolerates from him alone. I think about that night 4 months ago when I stood outside this building with $47 and a duffel bag and terror eating through my ribs, how I walked into this home expecting nothing beyond survival and found instead everything I had stopped believing existed. We eat dinner together as the city darkens beyond the windows, the 3 of us passing bread and conversation in comfortable silence. And when Thomas smiles that rare, beautiful smile that transforms his serious face, I feel wealth beyond any measure I understood before. Not the penthouse or the security or even the safety, but this, the simple, complicated miracle of family chosen and fought for and fiercely protected, love that grew in the spaces between danger and desperation and became something unshakable. Outside the glass, the city glitters with endless threat and possibility, territory lines and power struggles, and men who would still use me to hurt Alexander if given the chance. But inside these walls we have built something they cannot touch, a haven constructed from pasta and patience and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. And when Alexander's hand finds mine across the table and holds on, I know with absolute certainty that I am home.